Why do some email marketing campaigns print money and others flop? What are the keys to a great first and last email in a campaign? And what's an expert's single best tip for subject lines, sign up forms, first sentences, and calls to action in emails? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome to the I Want to Know podcast. While I normally invite someone on to ask me questions about how to get customers from their content, today I'm going to do something a bit different. This will be a flip the script episode where I've invited an expert on who I want to learn from, and I'll ask him the questions. My guest today is Dylan Bridger. Dylan helps time strapped coaches and course creators maximize their email revenue with his bold commission only service. Fed up with false promises from marketers and determined to bring integrity back to the industry, Dylan takes on the risk so his clients don't have to. Follow him on X at Dylan_Bridger or on LinkedIn, where he shares email marketing insights with over 7,300 business owners across X, LinkedIn, and email. Hey, Dylan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Great to be here.
I was just saying before we recorded, I've followed you on Twitter. I've interacted with you a bunch, I think, on there. Yet we've never spoken before. So it's great to actually meet you in person. And I really respect the way you approach stuff. And as someone who does a lot of email marketing and obviously is big on email and newsletters myself, I'm really excited to throw some questions at you and get your perspective on this stuff because I think you've got a good take on a lot of it. So let's jump right into it. So, what I want to do is I want to start with a hypothetical scenario. So, let's say there are two businesses who offer the same service to the same people. They both do a 1 week email marketing campaign to sell their new product. But one of the businesses winds up getting twice as many sales as the other. So, my question to you in this hypothetical scenario are what are the three biggest things that the one that succeeded did differently that led them to succeed and the other to fail?
Absolutely. Great question. So in this case, I bet the winning brand did three things differently. The brand that generated more revenue. The first thing is they probably studied, if they had the luxury of this, they probably studied what past promotions have already generated sales for that particular product or service to that particular list. So that might, if they had the luxury of having emails that have sold before, that's a great starting point. That leaves a lot of clues because, yeah, I find the best proxy for determining what's going to work next is what's already worked. So that's a big one. And then the second piece is they probably sent a higher volume of emails versus the other brand, not just to have more impressions and just more like the sheer math, like more likelihood
Mhm.
of generating sales, but also to cover a wider surface area of the sales argument versus what you could only get across in a few emails. And because I find, like, simply put, the more you mail, the more you're willing to email, the more you'll tend to make. And in a lot of cases, it's not always the case, but I have found that to be the case. And I feel like that's a bit of a cliche among email marketers and copywriters. But one nuance that I think is important to highlight is that by only sending a couple of emails, you're actually putting a lot of pressure on each one of those emails to do a lot of persuasive heavy lifting. And what happens then is that it best case scenario, it might end up coming across as a little bit overly salesy because you do legitimately need to cover the whole argument. And then also it can sometimes be distracting because each email will need to focus on a number of different disparate ideas versus if you spread it out over more emails, each email can focus on one idea. So it's more enjoyable to consume, more easy to understand. So that I would say simply sending more emails, covering varied elements of why they should buy is a big difference maker. And then the third thing that the winning brand probably did differently is to ironically focus more effort on upfront research on the reader and making the offer, like how they're framing what they're selling, more appealing, put more effort on that than they spend wordsmithing the actual emails. Because, this is not very tactical, but I think it's a crucial mindset reframe because, like, a lot of the research does the heavy lifting. Like, knowing what to say, I think, is a little bit more important than knowing
Mhm.
exactly how to say it. Because I really don't think you need to be a great writer to get great results from. There's like an old school direct mail expert. His name is Ed. I think it's either Mayer or Meyer. I'm actually not sure how it's pronounced. But he once said that, like, direct marketing campaigns, so getting a result from sending it out, boils down to about 40% the list that you're mailing to, 40% the offer, and only 20% the actual creative, which in our case would be the emails you write. And I have found this to
Mhm.
be generally true in my experience. Because if I have a really relevant offer for a really hot list, I've gotten away with sending some not incredible emails and still gotten great results.
Wow, really, really good stuff. And there's a bunch I want to jump in on there, but I'll start with just one of the last things you said. It's interesting because I actually posted on social today. So Alex Lull, who writes this newsletter called the Steel Club, he had sent his newsletter yesterday. He talked about he had recently launched a product, and he sent an email to people after the promotion had ended. So he sent one to people who had clicked the links and checked out the product but didn't buy, and essentially he surveyed them to find out like why they didn't buy. And he explained that there were most of the answers fell into sort of three categories. They either said the price was too high, they said they didn't think it wouldn't be useful to beginners, and I forget what the third one was. But so he wrote in this sort of what he learned from it, and he was saying that it made him think, okay, well, I should have done a better job communicating the value. I should have done a better job communicating that it's good for beginners too. And I forget what the third thing was. But my take on it was, and this is what I posted on social, first of all, I think it's a great tactic to survey people that didn't buy and you'll learn a lot. And I
Yeah.
think everything he said is probably right to a certain degree, but I thought he missed what is the most likely case, which is he had attracted the wrong people in the first place. And to me, and this goes to your point about the list, which is what made me think about it, that if you have a lot of people saying that your $99, that the reason they didn't buy your $99 product is that the price is too high, you probably attracted the wrong people in the first place. And it's not your copywriting. I mean, look, it can be multiple things, right? More
Yeah.
than one thing can be true. But to me, that was something that he didn't really consider, where I was like, I don't want to call it a failure because I know he sold a bunch and I think it was fine. But the real reason all these people weren't buying is they were the wrong people up front. And it's funny, and I posted it and I forget who said this, but somebody replied to it and agreed with it and pointed out that the name of the newsletter is the Steel Club. And maybe if you're attracting people who want to steal stuff, those aren't necessarily the kind of people that want to pay $99 for stuff. Which
Interesting
I
point.
also thought was a pretty good point in retrospect. But I want to jump back to the first thing you said. So you talked about if you have past campaigns that worked, studying what worked. So for somebody that's doing that, there's so many variables, right, in a given email, let alone a whole campaign. So when you go back and study, how do you think about what lessons to take from that, right? Like, did it work because subject line? Are you literally taking those same emails? How are you trying to get at like, okay, and analyze why did this work and what lessons can I take from it?
Good question. And the short answer is there's no super clear cut shortcut to it. And it's
Mhm.
admittedly a bit of a hairy, sloppy process. But what I'm usually looking at is like, if I look at an email that did 10 times better than any other emails they've sent, I'm looking for like, what's the big core like emotion or benefit that it's pitching? Like, for example, is it like make more money, or is it notably save more time, whereas everything else has been make more money? Two random examples.
Mhm.
So if that were to be the case, then I would probably double click and want to do explore more of like the save more time angle, because maybe there's something there. Admittedly, granted, you're right. It could have been one, sheer randomness.
Mhm.
Two, the subject line looked a bit better. It could have been any number of things. But I'm looking for clues, and then from that taking my hypothesis forward and then further refining it. And then so first I'm looking for the big boulders, right? Which is like, yeah, what's the main emotion, the main benefit that we're getting across? I'm looking for presence of things that we don't normally put in. For example, did you include like a guarantee? Did you highlight the guarantee in this email? Whereas otherwise you never do that. If so, then I'm going to propose moving forward, you should probably include a highlight of the guarantee. So like dissecting it and making a best educated guess. And it's not the kind of thing where like you're going to look at it and day two, you go ahead and you're going to have the golden keys for the rest of time, but you probably have a better starting point than otherwise. And then hopefully when you move forward that iteration, then over time it becomes more like, okay, now by the end of it, you're just split testing like one subject line versus the other, and you can get those
Yeah.
kind of small things. But usually if something the outperforms like to an extreme degree, there's usually something notably different with it versus everything else. Maybe it's that you put a photo of your face in this one email and you've never done that before.
Mhm.
So I'm looking for like the massive differences versus the average baseline of how they do things before or otherwise. Does that
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, it's interesting that no, very much so. And you talking about the different emotion and benefit reminds me, and I don't remember where I heard it, but somebody was talking about A/B testing landing pages, sales pages, that kind of stuff. But it applies to emails as well. And what they were saying is that a lot of people, when they A/B test something, they A/B test the wrong stuff. So they're like, let me change the color of the button, let me change this one word, or let me change this, that, or even let me change the length of the page or whatever. And all those are valid. But what I had heard the person say was they were like, when you do an A B test, you should be testing different emotion, different benefit, these big overarching things that are really going to move the needle. That, like, just changing a button color or a word on your call to action button, it might change something, but the way you're really going to learn stuff is the underlying, essentially, sales pitch, right? The emotional pull, the benefit. That if you just do that and say, okay, this time this page is designed to appeal to people's fears and this one is designed to appeal to their desires, you're going to learn a lot. And you're much more likely to see significant differences in response than you are if you change the button color from blue to green.
Absolutely. And things like that, there's the essence of the offer level. And then there's also like format things like, is this a story versus normally it's a straight pitch,
Mhm.
vice versa. And if that makes a big
Yeah.
difference, then boom, you have two buckets where you probably want to do more stories, assuming it wasn't random, which you could only determine by further testing.
Yeah.
But yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. And so the other thing I wanted to jump in on that you said was the sending of more emails, right?
Mhm.
Which I think is, well, first of all, I loved, it's interesting because you hear people all the time say, send more emails, email your audience more, more frequency. But I don't actually hear people usually say what you said, which is the reason for that is it's more different emails. It's not just keep selling them the same thing. And I forget exactly the phrase that you used, but that you're covering a sort of wider swath of reasons. And I also think it's a great point that you made that the fewer emails you send, the more pressure you're putting on those few emails to do the job. And I think one of the reasons people don't want to send more emails is their own sort of insecurity about bothering people or annoying people. And but I think this actually plays into their insecurity because you can go, well, how sure are you that the one email you sent is actually going to do the job? Right. So you can use their own insecurity against them to convince them to send more emails. But so, with all that said, I'm curious. Let's use this hypothetical example, right? If someone's doing a 1 week long campaign, how do they know how many emails is too many? How many emails is not enough? I mean, again, there's no clear cut right answer here. But if someone's trying to figure out, look, I'm doing a 1 week campaign, let's say I'm going to sell my course, how many emails should I send?
Yeah. And honestly, I have to give all credit here to I follow Ben Settle, who's a very well known email
Mhm.
marketing guru. I follow his sort of approach on this, and which many other people also use. But the short answer is at least an email, and he would push it even further. But I recommend at least one email every single day that of the launch,
Mhm.
and then at the very least, two emails on deadline day. And like when I'm running them, I will usually encourage like two emails a day and anywhere from 3 to 5, depending on how aggressive and how used to the list they are to receiving emails from the
Mhm.
sender. And ironically, there's times where I've sent like 5 emails on deadline day, and it has among the lowest unsubscribes of that entire campaign where I'm sending one or two emails otherwise.
Interesting. And are you, when you're sending that volume of emails, are you allowing people to opt out? So, for example, let's say you send 2 emails on Monday. Is there any language in there for them to say, hey, please, I'm not interested in this. Don't send me 10 emails over the next 3 days?
Absolutely. So like one that they're like, my assumption is that everyone's using unsubscribe link period across the board. But then furthermore, if you want to keep people on your list, yeah, you can have something to the effect of,
Mhm.
if you know for sure that you have no interest in this product, click here, you'll stay on our main list, but you'll opt out of this sequence this week. And that could be a good way to retain and
Mhm.
minimize churn a little bit. And I just want to be,
Does-
sorry, you go ahead.
yeah, no, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something. I want to be clear that like there is for anyone listening thinking, I want to make sure no one tunes out right away based on me saying that aggressive ascending cadence, because I understand that for some that sounds like a lot. To be clear, like you can get decent results with sending less than that, But yeah, like I said, I think a
Mhm.
minimum of one per day, especially if you're in like a launch or something like that, I think that's table stakes in this day and age.
Do you think about it differently at all if the list that you're using so for me, I have the newsletter. The newsletter is sort of the product, right? It's not like I'm a brand where I have an email list and I sporadically email people. I have a newsletter that I'm basically sending every day, and people subscribed for the newsletter. How do you think about that? Whereas, like, okay, if I'm a brand or I send sporadic, like people are on my email list about my products and I send sporadically versus someone where it's like it is a content newsletter, but then obviously I'm using that list to promote my stuff. Do you think about that any differently or approach it the same way?
I personally think about it pretty much the same way because the way
Mhm.
I aim to write emails and the way I encourage my clients to write their own emails is to always be on the lookout for, in an ideal world, even a pitch email should be in some way useful to that reader. So I think that
Mhm.
I personally don't categorize it and create that distinction too much, though I understand. Now, another way is that if it's someone like you, for example, like one way is you could have, say, a morning send where it's your regular thing. That's the product people are coming for. And then maybe in the evening, you'll do the sort of like the pitch or like the more promotional email marketing kind of a send. So that's another way you can go about it. But frankly, I keep it simple and in more cases than not, I just try to make newsletter emails that are a little bit more direct than they otherwise are, but are still valuable to some extent.
For what it's worth, for anyone who's watching or listening, I'm actually it's interesting timing for us to have this conversation because I'm just coming off having done a week-long promotion for my skill sessions before a price increase. And what I did was, I emailed daily. It essentially replaced my daily newsletter emails. I was sharing excerpts from all the sessions, so it was valuable content. It wasn't just like promotional pitches. For people that were existing members of my skill sessions, they got a separate set of daily emails because I wasn't going to promote to them the product they've already bought. So they actually got a separate set of emails that was promoting upgrading to new higher tier levels of membership that I have. And people who are in those higher tiers weren't getting anything. So they got a week off from hearing from me. And I sent one email a day. And then on the last day, I sent two emails. It worked well. It mirrored, to your point, it mirrored what I had done 6 months earlier when I had done another promotion prior to a price increase. So I did model off of that and make a few tweaks. But again, just for anyone that's curious, that's how I approached it as someone who has a newsletter as opposed to just an email list. So great stuff. We are off to a good start. Just a quick side note before we get to my next question for Dylan. If you're listening to this episode, I assume it's because you want to learn how to use email marketing to get more customers. That's something I also help members do in my skill sessions membership, which I was just talking about. I have sessions like the newsletter social playbook and the newsletter booster, which give you proven strategies to grow your email list. Plus, sessions like the 1 week promo plan give you entire campaign templates you can adapt to promote your own products. And I literally just 2 days ago recorded a new session called the subscriber to customer converter that is all about how to get actual sales from your newsletter. As a skill session member, you also can get one-on-one help from me each month on our jam session coaching calls. Go to joshspector.com/sessions if you want to learn more, or feel free to email me at josh@joshspector.com if you have any questions or just want to know if what I offer in them is a good fit for what you need. Okay, let's get back to my next question for you. So, two of the most important emails in any email marketing campaign are the first email you send and the last one you send. So, I'd love to hear from you. What would you say are the three keys to a great first email? And then what would you say are the three keys to a great last email?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question. And at the risk of sounding contrarian, and I completely agree with that statement. I think it's a great question. I'd love to preface my answer with two really quick points just to add a bit of nuance to my
Yeah.
answer. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
I'll make it quick. So one, the as I said before, I think in general people don't really give enough credit to those emails in between the first and last email. Which, and I only flag that because I noticed that's the case in a lot of clients I work with. And while they might not have the largest like spike in revenue, I think it's important to keep those in mind. And like I said, try to cover as much different angles of the argument as you can. And then my second point is that I've tested a handful of different approaches to the first and last emails, both on my personal email list, on a number of my clients' lists. In fairness, not all of these were statistically significant. So take it with an appropriate grain of salt. But I've tested both unusual, kind of creative approaches to the first and last email that are a little bit more clever or cute. And I've also tested more direct, sort of standard approaches. And I have found that today in July 2024, what has been working for me best is a more direct approach for both the first and the last emails. And I want to preface with that because I know it's not very maybe exciting or novel, but
Mhm.
but I have found it to be producing the best results for me. So anyway, with that out of the way, I'll dive in. I think you said
Yeah.
the three keys to a great first email. So I think the key is one, a subject line and or preview text declaring that this is new and ideally unique. So that might look like introducing, announcing, you're invited.
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be fancy, just something that signals that this is different than the regular course of action. The second point is an overall focus on the benefit or the outcome of buying the product or service, not on the features of the product or service. So it really doesn't matter if it's to some extent, it doesn't really matter if it's an ebook versus a cohort based course versus whatever else. What matters is that the solution you're pitching. And then the third thing is specificity surrounding the deadline. So in my opinion, you're better. I would avoid saying in a few days and instead say something like this expires at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday,
Mhm.
August 10th, because it becomes more believable if it's specific. So those are some tips for the first email.
So before we
Yeah,
go to the last email,
please.
let's drill into that a little bit. And I think those are really good tips. And especially so I love the first one about the subject line. And I in my own mind, I was like, wait, what was the subject line I used? Because I think I probably could have done a better job with this. And I think especially for someone like me, for someone that is emailing regularly and is sending a newsletter, and my subject lines are not like today's newsletter. They tend to be a little vague, a little teasy. They tend to be similar to what you would think. They're designed to make people curious and get them to open. But what I was realizing or thinking about as you were talking about it is, if I do the same thing with this sort of announcement of a new offer, it doesn't break the pattern. So people that are just looking at it could very easily think, oh, it's just his newsletter today, right? If I don't do something like announcing or new thing or whatever it is, um, it's funny. I think I'm gonna have to, while we're doing this, I'm gonna look up what I actually used as my subject line and probably criticize myself. But I think that's a great point. And I think not only there's the making sure they understand that this is a new thing or it's different or it's timely or whatever, but also what I'm getting at is the pattern break, right? If you are someone that's regularly emailing them, whatever you're putting in that subject line should probably look or feel or sound different than what you typically, and I'm about to pull up right here again. I don't. And it's funny, like I'll give you an example just from my sort of, and I'm guessing that also applies to the last one as well. But so yeah, and this is here's a uh well, I did it a little bit. So I used the subject line, my newsletter is going to be a little different this week. So not exactly, hey, new product, hey, this is your chance, but at least it was something that said, quite literally said, hey, it's going to be a little different. And then I'm just looking, the final day, the email I sent in the morning, the subject line was today's the day. Okay. It's not exactly as clear as like last chance, but then in the afternoon email I sent, the subject line is I never do this. I never do this, but dot
I
dot dot.
noticed that one.
So not bad. And I've used that one before. And so they're teasy. Like if I'm judging my own stuff, like they're teasy, they're going to generate opens. They feel a little different, but they're not. I do think there's probably a missed opportunity there to what you're saying is they don't say there's a product. It doesn't say introducing or new or this is your, they're not referencing the fact that this was the last week that people could get this thing at that price.
Yeah.
And those subject lines for me are the kinds of subject lines I might write for a typical issue of my newsletter. And that's probably not, even if they're in a vacuum, a good subject line, the fact that they sound like other issues in my newsletter probably isn't great.
Yeah, and I think there's of course a gray area here, right? It's like one, you want to balance like your brand, like everything you just told me in terms of your
Mhm.
subject lines are definitely on brand as a fan of your newsletter. So that's good. And also there's an element of trying to stay out of like promotions tab and spam filter, which is
Mhm.
a whole other that's a whole other podcast episode. But yeah, I think what you said is true. There's kind of two things you're trying to pattern interrupt yourself, right? So that people
Hmm.
stop and say, okay, this is different. But then also a really good book that I recommend to you and any of your listeners is Great Leads by Michael Masterson. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it.
I've actually never heard of it, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. So like to make a really long story short, I had read it a couple of years ago and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then about 6 months or so ago, I reread it. And on the second read, it like completely made everything, a lot of things with copywriting make a lot more sense to me.
Mhm.
Because what he basically proposes in short is like, depending on on who you're speaking to, on how aware they are of your products, speaking to them in different ways with different levels of direction or indirection they'll respond better in different
Mhm.
ways. So if you have a bunch of people on your list that were sitting on the fence, know about your skill sessions offer, but haven't bought it yet for whatever reason, if you're using like an indirect subject line, they might just not know, not think it's speaking to
Mhm.
them. But if you come in and say like 24 hours only, here's the deal, then it might be like, okay, you're speaking to me
Yeah.
now because I already know I want the product. It's
Do
just
you know, I'm curious, we're gonna talk about final emails in a second, but I'm curious for me, and I know this is relatively common, but I wonder if you have some experience or sort of stats with this. The vast majority of sales come in the last 24 hours, certainly the last 24 to 48 hours. That's what I found my own personal experience. I'm curious how you think about that. And maybe this is a nice sort of lead into the three things you would do with that last email. But I'm guessing that's pretty common practice that most sales are coming at the end?
Yeah, it is, and I would say, like, more often than not it's funny, I wrote my last email I sent, which I'm overdue to mail my list now, but a couple weeks ago, I sent my email list on this very topic, which was essentially a report on a recent campaign I did, and whereas typically it's like launches follow somewhat of a U shape, so, like, day 1, a big
Mhm.
surge, however many days in between, there's a lull, and then on the end day, it's either as much or more than the first day. That's, like, general wisdom. In this particular case, it was a soft start and then sure enough ramped up to like a big peak at the end. So I think the short answer to all that to say that yes, I found the last day is pretty consistently a strong day. The first day, however,
Mm.
in 2020, in my personal experience, I have found it's a little bit more variable than perhaps maybe once upon a time it was with launches. And there could be various reasons for that. But
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so give me 3 keys, to writing a great last email.
yeah. So I think number one is this probably will come as no surprise, but a subject line that signals that this is their last chance or final notice or last call.
Mhm.
I know this might sound like cringy, outdated advice, but I simply have not been able to outperform this sort of tried and true technique, despite resisting it for the past couple of years, to be honest. So if in doubt, it's hard to go wrong with that. The second piece is almost more of a landing page level consideration, but it's actually making, and I know this could be controversial and people have different takes on this, but I'm a big believer in actually making the promo expire almost out of the minute of when you say it's going to expire. I know people have
Mm.
different philosophies on this. Personally, I think a safer bet is to operate from that place. And if you need to do an extension or something like that, I would say do it at your own risk because the reason being is because people might not trust your deadlines if you either
Yeah.
extend them. And so that's something I would say. And third, and this is an important point, is by the end of the promotion, you should be keeping your email short and sweet because by now, ideally, if you've sent enough emails and if you've been doing this right, covering enough different aspects of the sales argument, by the end, you are shifting from persuading to essentially reminding and leaning on the deadline to do most of the persuasive heavy lifting. So the more you get in your own way by trying to sell, you're just getting in the way of the
Mhm.
natural forces of that deadline. So you might as well just wield that instead and keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, I love that, and especially that last point, that's exactly what I've done with the last email that I send. So, on the last day, because I've been sending 2, the morning one is, like, loaded with testimonials. It's like a sort of social proof, "Oh my god, look at all these people," whatever. And then that last one that I send in the afternoon, and I'll just read it for people that are listening. So the subject line is, "I never do this, but dot." And then the whole email just says, "I don't want you to miss out. So I'm sending an extra email today to remind you there are only 8 hours left to join my Skill Sessions membership for just $350 before the price goes up to $599. If you've been thinking about joining and happen to read this email before it's too late, maybe it's a sign you should. There are no coincidences. Winky face." And that's it. And I found that I've used that a couple times now, and it feels like it works really well. I mean, again, sales are going to go up because it's the end of the whatever. So it's tough to separate how much is that? But I can definitely tell you before I didn't used to send that second email in the afternoon. I didn't used to send that one. And I definitely doing that. So the combination of sending the extra email, the combination of, yeah, and that one I'm not selling, I'm not saying here's the features, here's why you should get it, blah, blah, blah. I'm basically just saying, here it is. This is your last chance to get it before the price goes up. And I think again, this is anecdotal in my own mind, but I like that little bit at the end. It's really aimed at the people that are like almost there,
Yep.
right? It's like, hey, maybe this is a sign. Like you've been thinking about it, you're almost gonna do it, and maybe I think when I came up with that, I was like, "Ooh, this is good." I like, and again, I don't have any stats to back it up, other than I know if it were me and I was teetering on that brink, that I would, you know what? I probably should do it. Um, and again, the winky face undercuts all of it, and it's not like an aggressive whatever, but it's just like that. In some ways, in my mind, I use, and I think there's different ways to do it, but I think from a mindset perspective, my goal of that email is yes, it's a last chance thing and awareness and to make sure people don't forget and whatever. But that to me, that email is really speaking to the people that are almost there. They just need a little bit of a nudge to get over. They want it, but they haven't gotten the credit card out,
Yep.
kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's different
Um,
too, right? It has your personality.
yeah. Yeah, right. And I think that's a key with everything, right? Like you want your emails in any campaign, you want them to match the tone that resonates with your audience and all of that. Like it'd be really weird if I was suddenly like, yeah, I'm pitching that product every day for a week, but I'm not like suddenly aggressive. I know like it matches the tone of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Great. So that was really helpful. So let's get to my last question for you, which is actually a bunch of questions rolled into one. So, what I want to do here is I'm going to give you a bunch of different topics, and I'd love to hear your single best tip for each one. So, we'll go one by one here. So, the first one is subject lines. What is your single best tip for subject lines?
Yeah, single best tip is to promise a benefit in a way that builds curiosity. And exhibit A of this, your daily newsletter. I think you do a magnificent job of this. And that's you can barely go wrong with that combination.
Do you know, I'm curious, and maybe you don't, but do you know off the top of your head, can you think of, do you know what your best performing subject line has ever been for something that you've done, or one that sticks out that was really good?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that comes to mind immediately, and it's funny. I need to overwrite this. My welcome sequence is out of date, but my third welcome sequence email of my newsletter email list, I
Mhm.
forget the exact wording, but I think it's like, and I'm cringing on it now because there's so many things wrong with this, but the subject line is use email to make like, I think it's like 3,000, like a certain specific amount of money on a hike in Italy, question mark. Which, like, I'm embarrassed
Mhm.
confessing that because I feel like I sound like a make money online scammer. But that,
But it worked.
yeah, I mean, that subject line has generated about, I would say, 70 to 80% of my inbound coaching lead flow via email
Wow.
marketing.
That's amazing. And I think if you zoom out from it, what that subject line is actually doing is it's teasing the result that people want,
Yeah.
like very clearly, right? Uh, one other quick note on subject lines here. It's one of my favorite stats. Uh, the subject line of the single most opened email ever sent from the Obama campaign. I forget if it was during his first election or the second. I think it might have been the second, but the most open subject line of any email they ever sent, the subject line was just "Hey," just the word "Hey"
Or-
from Barack Obama. Hey, most open subject line they ever had. Might work better if your name's Barack Obama than it will for you, but give it a shot. Okay, so next thing here is give me your single best tip for email sign up forms.
I would say, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not an expert on the acquisition side, but I think add as much
Mhm.
proof as possible. And that there's more than just number of subscribers. Is it years in business, notable endorsements, why you're unique, why now? So just try to prove everything succinctly, of course, but try to prove things so that I have reason to believe that it's actually worth
Mhm.
signing up.
The next one is give me your single best tip for the first sentence in an email.
Yeah. So when in doubt, I've found you can rarely go wrong with copyright copywriter Gary Halbert's. I think he was who pioneered it, but the if then lead. So basically, if you want
Mhm.
this outcome, then this email will show you exactly how to get it. And then you launch into whatever it is that you have to say.
It's funny, that's so simple, and I don't think that I have use that. I mean, maybe I've done a version of it. What's interesting as I'm thinking about it, I do that. I don't necessarily do it in a lot of my emails, but I actually do it in social posts promoting this podcast.
Cool.
So like this podcast, I do it not the if, but I'll do some version of like, want to know how to fill in the blank? I explain it in my new podcast, which is basically the if then outcome. So I do it, but I never really thought about it that way. And it works, by the way. It works well in social posts as well as emails. Okay. What is your single best tip for images in emails?
Yeah. So, well, I don't always or even necessarily often include images strictly in an effort to reduce email deliverability risks, which I'm not an expert in, but I've heard that it can sometimes increase your chances of getting in the promotions or the spam tabs.
Yep.
I think I've found that there's something magnetic about seeing a person's face. So especially if you're a coach and a creator, which I understand a lot of your audience is, Josh, I encourage selfies. I personally often get more responses when I insert selfies somewhere in my emails.
Interesting. Yeah, and I also am not a huge fan of images in emails in general. My newsletter has no images other than a logo at the top. Um, I don't even think I'm just trying to think like when I was doing my promotional campaign for that week, I don't think I had any. I would link to stuff that had images and videos, but I don't think I had any images in it at all. Which I probably should test at some point, like even like you said, an image of myself or something. Okay, what is your best tip for either call to action sentences or button copy? Either way.
Yeah.
How do you get them to actually click?
Yeah. So I almost never use button copy for what that's worth. Nothing against
Mhm.
it. I just don't really use it. I would say always remember to make whatever you're asking them to do seem quick, easy, and safe. So that might look like reminding them that it only takes 2 seconds. It might look like saying there are no
Mhm.
obligations and you won't be hard sold, whatever it is. But people are so scared to, and rightfully so, to take any action. So the more you can reassure them, the more likely they're going to do it.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and the time sensitivity piece also I have found applies to blog posts, pocket like anything, right? Especially if it's short. If you want people to do a survey, tell them that it's only 3 questions,
Yep.
right? If you say do a 3-question survey, you're gonna get more clicks than do a survey,
Yeah.
right? Because 'Cause they're like, "I don't know, it's gonna take me forever," or whatever. So yeah, the when you create things that are short or that you can make seem short and quick, that is definitely a selling point that will increase your clicks. I'm curious, when you're creating emails and you want to drive people to a sales page or to whatever, do you typically will you link to that multiple times in a typical email? Will you just have sort of one link in it? I assume you won't have competing links usually. You'll probably just there's one action that you want them to take, but how do you think about that frequency of links within an email?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, what you said is definitely true. I always have just one page, like every competing thing you're cannibalizing from your main ask. So, but I find more often than not, and it's intuitive to be honest, where I'm putting them, but up to a maximum of 3 links, usually one, if it makes sense, towards the middle, and then one again at the bottom. Because you want just enough, you want to build up a case to some extent, build up some desire and interest before you send them
Mhm,
there. Unless your newsletter is a bit of a different story because the whole format relies on basically
mhm.
subject line and then, which I think is great, by the way. But yeah, I think like one towards the middle top, one at the bottom, but if in doubt, one at the bottom.
How do you think about, or, and maybe it just varies, or is this something you think about? Will you have so let's say you have an email and you're talking about whatever the thing is, and ultimately you're trying to drive them to a sales page. Will you have a sort of standalone paragraph or sentence that is go here to check out to learn more about blah, 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 and that whole thing's a link? Will you have it incorporated into a paragraph? Like, will you try, even though you're not using button copy, will you try to separate it or just
Yes, yeah. I used to like last year and the year before, I was doing a lot more like just embedding almost like inline links inside my copy. But
Mhm.
since I've drifted away from that and now I'm doing more explicit, almost like button like sentences, like a full
Yeah.
line hyperlinked. And a tip from one of my friends, Andrew Gould, I think is how I pronounce his last name. He's on
Yeah.
Twitter, Andrew Write Copy, I think is his handle. And he had the idea of doing, I think it's like two equal signs and then a like greater than symbol. And
Mhm.
I've been using that.
So, like, to create an arrow,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
many more people do it, but yeah, so create an arrow and do it
Mhm.
that way. That's what I've been using lately to good results.
Cool. Do you use a PS much in emails?
Yeah, almost always, but not necessarily always, but yeah, very
Yeah.
often.
And will you typically put a link in there, or what will you typically like, how will you what will you typically put in the
Yeah.
PS?
If the PS is like short and sweet, because usually I use it as essentially a real estate to insert one extra piece of proof, like a testimonial, for example,
Mhm,
or one
mhm.
extra. Again, I'm always thinking of how can I cover as broad a surface area of reasons why they should buy as possible. So maybe like I'll use that to highlight some like a bonus that we haven't been talking much yet. So if it's just like a quick little, I usually won't put another link. But if it comes down and if I have like a PS and a PPS, then maybe then I'll do it so that they don't have to
Mm,
scroll too far up. But if I see like two links in one screen, that's usually a symptom of a bit of overkill in terms of the volume of links.
gotcha. Cool. What is your best tip for welcome emails or the first email that people get when they sign up to your list?
Yeah, so I recommend, especially if you sell like coaching or courses, really any like informational trust based thing. I like to ask for a reply to increase the odds that your future emails land in their inbox, and two, because I found that I have this little phrase I think I've coined, which is repliers are buyers, in that it's a very
Yeah,
non-threatening way.
it's definitely true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very non.
Well, you know what I heard? This is just I'll hop on that for a second. The other thing I heard someone say, which is along those lines, and they were actually it extends to repliers, but they were actually talking about it also in terms of like commenters and comments on social posts. And what they said is the longer the reply, the more likely they are to buy.
Yes, yes,
And they would actually pull. So they would sometimes like it was someone who had a big social following, and they would pull all the comments from like posts that like it was on Facebook or whatever it was, right? And they would pull it and they would literally put it into like a spreadsheet and just and like they could look at it and be like, the ones that are the longer those comments are, the more likely they are to buy. But yeah, I totally agree. Repliers are buyers. That's a good
yeah,
line.
100%. So yeah, that would be that.
Is there what do you do or in terms of getting those replies, do you have a sort of go-to way that you like to approach the welcome email to makes people more likely to
Yeah,
reply?
I think it comes down to, again, quick, easy save. So I will typically instruct like reply with either one word or like a specific
Mhm,
small short phrase. I know this is a little bit there's a good argument about leaving it open-ended and saying like hit reply with any questions
mhm.
or something like this. And I have done that too, and it can work, but there's just more of a cognitive load for someone to think and type something out than there is for them to say like got it or received or something like that. So I usually keep it simple and just ask for a quick reply. And then follow on tip there is I have a relatively small email list and this might not apply to people at massive scale unless you have the infrastructure and the systems. But if you ask for a reply, I really would make sure that you respond thoughtfully or at least acknowledge it at all if you have the bandwidth because it can
Yeah.
create it runs the risk of creating actually a bad first impression if it's
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're yeah, don't request replies if you're not gonna reply to the replier because it's gonna do you more harm than good. It's funny we're talking about this because for anyone that's interested, I actually just a couple days ago changed my welcome email and again with the goal of getting replies, which is usually what my goal has been, but I just changed how I'm doing it a bit. For anyone that's curious, so right now my welcome email is someone signs up for my newsletter, they get an email. The subject line says, "Let's get you a customer today." It says, "Thanks for subscribing to my For the Interested newsletter. I assume you did because you want to get customers from your content. So let's not waste any time. Reply to this email and let me know." And then I have two questions. One, who's your target customer? Two, what content platform do you use most for your business? For example, LinkedIn, newsletter, YouTube, podcast, etc. And then I say, I'll send you a proven strategy you can use on that platform to get more customers from your content. Let's make some magic happen. And then in the PS, I link them to some free excerpts from my skill sessions to get some awareness that those exist. So I literally just rolled it out. We'll see what happens. But yeah, again, trying to do exactly what you want. And if they reply, they can hopefully, it's very easy and simple for them to reply and say, my ideal customers are this person, and this is the platform that I use. And they don't have to give me their life story unless they want to. Okay. So the next one, what is your single best tip when it comes to email length?
Yeah, I don't really believe there's a definitive or right answer to this question. I happen to be a little bit bullish on short emails right now. It's inspired by you, incidentally.
Oh,
Yeah, I
thank
really
you.
like that format. So I've been testing that a little bit as well. A little bit longer than yours, but even some that are pretty much just as short as
Mm.
yours. Now, next year, I might be singing a different tune, but I will say that the vast
Mhm.
majority of my emails fall in like the 100 to 700 word range, which I know is a massively wide range, but that gives you like probably some extreme
Mhm.
limits that I tend to follow within.
If you're doing a week-long campaign, will you purposefully mix it up and have some emails be longer and some be
Yep.
shorter?
Because,
Yeah.
and I don't know if
Okay.
this is
Cool.
interesting or not, but in the same way that like you want to cover different aspects of the sales argument, you also ideally want to message in formats that different people resonate with. So some people like reading long copy, some people like
Mhm.
reading short. So by
Mhm.
crossing by having more chances across the board, you might increase your chances of attracting someone.
Totally makes sense. So, okay, so let's wrap up here. Instead of giving you another topic, I just want to have a sort of open wild card here. Give me one tip, whatever your favorite tip is that we haven't covered yet that you think people will find
Yeah,
helpful.
unfortunately, we've touched on it, but I'm still gonna say it because it's that important and it's been a massive breakthrough for me.
Mhm.
So if you strike gold by creating an email that works once, milk that asset for all that it's worth. So whether that like don't send it every day, but resend that again
Mhm.
in the future as is because it will probably work again, likely more than one time. And another thing you could do is give it a new subject line, maybe even a new first sentence, and ultimately converge to the same
Mhm.
general email. But more than that, analyze why we talked about this, but analyze why that email worked in the first place, component by component, sentence by sentence, and try to just do more of what works. And similarly, if something does really badly, do the same thing, analyze maybe why that didn't work and stop doing stuff like that. Because I found that like proven emails for your business inside of your business is the closest thing to a holy grail in marketing, in email marketing that you can find. And I guess a bonus tip, because I can foresee this objection, if you don't have the luxury of any winning email creatives at all in your business, then then I would say ask yourself who might. So your biggest competitor
Mhm.
probably does. So I will seek clues by studying others. Don't plagiarize, of course. But if you have a competitor that's been running the same welcome sequence for years and years on end, and you have reason to believe that they're doing well, chances are there's something to be studied inside of those emails that could be insightful for you.
Yeah, really smart. Dylan, this was awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I always try to make these episodes actionable, and this is probably as actionable an episode. I feel like we didn't mess around with any like theoretical stuff. It was like, dude. So hopefully everyone that is listening to this is going to be able to immediately improve what they're doing. So let people know where they can follow you, connect with you, get more help from you, all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
absolutely. And thanks, Josh. This has been great, and I admire your work. So thank you so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm mostly active on X or Twitter. Dylan_Bridger is where you can find me there. Otherwise, LinkedIn, I should be more active there, so I'll probably be on there, Dylan Bridger. Otherwise, if you go to dylanbridger.com, DYLANBRIDGER.com, you can learn a little bit more about what I do, my services. And also, if you go to the navigation menu, there should be somewhere where you can opt into my email list if you're interested. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with you. Feel free to reach out
Well,
with questions.
you can see how he practices what he preaches. And if you want to see how I do it, my newsletter is fortheinterested.com/subscribe. My skill sessions, joshspector.com/sessions. I'm on Twitter at jspector. I'm on LinkedIn. And yeah, by now you guys have already pressed stop on this episode because you know we're wrapping things up. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Thanks again, Dylan. I will see you
Thank you.
next time.